Welcome everybody. It's nice that you all come and use Eastside projects. We're just getting to know it ourselves in this new version. We only opened, 15 days ago. We've had a number of events here happening already, so this is really great. I'm director of Eastside Projects. I'm also an artist curator. I'm also senior research fellow at the School of Art, Birmingham City University. I'm also chair of New Art West Midlands, so I'm trying to do a full declaration here. What else might I be? Have my fingers, and there's lots of things. I'll try and pick up on them as well. I want to talk a little bit about the future. So the future of Birmingham and of Digbeth, of art making in our city, and that this art making and the ability to do that needs to be grabbed, it needs to be squeezed, it needs to be shaped the way that you want it to be, the way that I want it to be, the way that we want it to be. Or someone else will always shape it for us. Birmingham is changing. It is changing faster and faster. It's had a slow regeneration, really, I think, in comparison to some other cities, but it has accelerated rapidly, especially over the past year. We've been invited to come here and discuss how we might or could help to sustain the future of the creative industries by grasping and providing opportunities and building new creative spaces, and I hope new creative processes. I don't think that the power of art or artists is under dispute. I think it's indisputable. But the ability to wield that power is under constant management at many different scales. Earlier this week we had a seminar from Professor Anthony Downey at Birmingham City University. It was about the rights to represent others, to affect politics, to affect legislation. And the example of artists and arts institutions, like ourselves here at Eastside Projects, engaging with the politics of refugees, of asylum seekers, and the wider problematics of immigration. And he suggested that the shifting of discussion from the political sphere into the cultural sphere is a neoliberal plan to ensure that resistance is safe here in this safe space of culture. That galleries and museums are in fact safe spaces to let people resist government policy without ever engaging with that policy directly. So I think if you believe that or take that as a proposition that is perhaps true around us, then we might agree that it's quite a tough job that we've all chosen to do. To make art is tough. To make art isn't to try and make politics. But we need to find positions that are generative for ourselves and for our cities, and that impact on people's lives, that are about survival within our local context. It's about our choice, which often is of course a privilege, to be able to choose what context we operate in, where others cannot. 10 years ago, we chose to invest a lot of our time and energy and all of our ideas into this space and here in Birmingham. We tried to put as much as we could into Eastside Projects. And this space, or a sort of version of it, I suppose, it was a very different version 10 years ago. We've arrived at calling ourselves an artist-run multiverse. I think because of that, things change so much, we welcome change. We're an institution that wants to learn from artists. We want to be a co-authored institution by who else comes and works with us, whether by invitation or by will or whim. But we are open to change. We encourage that, and we have changed quite a lot. A text that we adopted from an exhibition in an artist-run space in New York in 1979, set up by Peter Nadine, Christopher D'Arcangelo, and Nick Lawson. It's a text that we're still using now. It says, "We have joined together to execute functional constructions and to alter or refurbish existing structures as a means of surviving in a capitalist economy." And I think that we partly use it because you can still say that and it seems relevant and contemporary, even though that's 40 years ago. And so the idea of what has changed and how are we still able as artists run organisations, as artist curators, as funders, as whatever else you want to position yourself as within an art ecology or the world ecology. How do you survive in a capitalist economy? The statement really came back into focus for us last year when our building was closed down unexpectedly due to what I will only describe as operational building problems. And we had to accelerate our looking for a new space. We looked elsewhere in the city for another amazing space like this. We found ourselves competing with developers, church builders, restaurants, inner city high-value housing. We don't own this building, we don't have a building as an asset. Over the past 10 years, we've spent somewhere between £300,000 and £400,000 on rent. We could have bought this building, we could have bought 2 of these buildings in 2008 for that money. We decided to refurbish this existing structure because we didn't find a better opportunity quickly enough. And we're fortunate in this case to have a really strong partnership with Birmingham City University. They've been our partner since the start. They invested around £250,000 into the reimagining, refitting and remaking of Eastside projects, which that we think is an ongoing prototype gallery space. But we still don't have what is called an asset in a capitalist economy. When we're surrounded by the largest infrastructure project in the UK, HS2, right on our doorstep, it's changing the landscape around us. Digbeth has been an amazing place for artist organisations. It is, I think it is quite a wonderful, industrial, derelict, it's sort of becoming faux derelict. But the ad hocness of it has been really interesting. But it'll be a very different sort of ad hocness in the future, a sort of corporate ad hoc. There will be skyscrapers here. Developers are already trying to work out how to make that in this area. So we have not succeeded in opening up more space to be owned by artist-run organisations, as much as we are part of a rallying of activity in this area. And actually the biggest concentration of artists' activity in the history of our city has happened here in Digbeth over the past 10 years. Friction Arts have been able to buy their building. I think that's a really amazing achievement. They're on the other side of Digbeth High Street. And we commend Grand Union for pushing hard to try to renovate and take on a listed building in this area. But it is harder and harder to be able to do that in this site that we've invested so much energy into. We're looking for where are the other opportunities in this area with what has become the largest concentration now of Arts Council MPOs in the city's history. Actually, before this MPO round, there were only 2 visual arts MPOs in the city, just us and Icon Gallery. It's a really bizarre situation, so happily that has been greatly expanded by the last round. In our short time, we've seen organisations already coming and going across that whole period. I think now it feels like a really good energy again, actually, which is against what the other things that I might have been saying about the change in the landscape. But I come back to this question that I want to just put out there before I introduce the other speakers and just to keep it in the background. It's a question that you can't come up with a nice, easy answer to, but how do we survive in a capitalist economy when you disagree with underlying principles that shape the context around you? How do we foster a sustainable creative community given whatever answers you come up with to that first question? What are the opportunities for artist-led growth now here in Birmingham? And of course in other cities here in the Midlands, around the UK. What are the threats to artist-led growth? And what lessons have we learned, or do we still need to learn from other places? I think these are some of the questions that we might ask, but I'm hoping that the others will introduce more and you will also bring more to this party as well. So, I'm going to introduce all 3 of them now, and then I will ask each one to speak. First, we'll hear from Louise Latter, Head of Programme at BOM. BOM stands for Birmingham Open Media, in case you didn't know. Of course, you did know. And they are forging a new model of radical practice at the intersection of art, technology and science with measurable social impact. That's the sort of statement I like. That's a good statement. Louise was previously at FACT in Liverpool, where she managed the young people and learning programmes. BOM are also undergoing building work at the moment, which promises adding even more value to such an amazing site right next to New Street Station, right in the centre of the city. Our second speaker will be Amahra Spence. Amahra is Director of MAIA Creatives. MAIA are a production and development company building infrastructure, relationships and platforms to support sustainable creativity in cities. Amahra has quite a vision of to build an artist hotel Birmingham, which has us all fascinated. And she's also just completed a run of her play Concubine at the Rep Theatre here in Birmingham. It's just a few of the things that are happening. And then our third speaker, Craig Ashley, is Director of New Art West Midlands. New Art West Midlands is the contemporary visual arts network for the region. Its purpose is to strengthen and develop the contemporary visual arts sector in the West Midlands, working collectively to safeguard the future of artists and our sector as a whole. So it's quite a nice set of statements, how they all fit together. And Craig was previously visual arts producer at the MAC Birmingham from 2009 to 2016. So I think it's a really interesting group of people here who have had a long relationship with the city and are very involved in things that could be happening next. Okay, so I'm going to ask Louise to start us off. Yes. Over to you.
Hello.
Unless you want this one.
Go for it. I hope you could handle that anticipation. My introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. As Gavin said, I'm Louise Latter. I'm the head of programme at BOM. So I wanted to just quickly introduce BOM, if you don't already know. If you do know who we are, then I apologise to tell you again. But I want to talk a little bit about why I think we were probably asked to talk at this event, to put it into a bit of context when we're having the discussion after our introductions. BOM is a very young organisation, so we will have been open for 4 years in November. We became an NPO organisation, National Portfolio Organisation, this year in the round that Gavin was referring to, and we're delighted to be amongst our fellows and colleagues in the city. We are born of hacker culture, and we aim to support the creative economy and ecology by providing sustained support to a cohort of what we call fellows. So they are technologists, artists, scientists, researchers and producers who are a fellow at our organisation for 12 months, and then they normally carry on. So they can be with us from 1 year up to 3 years. And we work with them to produce exhibitions, to run different engagement projects, so they gain employment through us, through our engagement and collaboration programmes, and we also support them with their funding. They're able to get financial and... Shall I carry on? Is it not?
It's the cables.
Sorry.
Well, this one is... Whoa!
You can hold that one.
Woo!
Yeah. Do a sit.
Hey! I'm going to go see Beyonce and Jay-Z tomorrow.
Yeah. Beyonce holds it there.
I feel like
there.
I could get my Sasha Fierce on. Okay, I will... do I have to start again? No one actually told me that you couldn't hear me. Okay. I can't remember what I was saying now.
No, they could hear you. It was just clicking.
Okay. Yes, so the fellows, so they also, yes, they can use our spaces, they can access the space 24 hours a day, they get legal, business, financial support from experts on our board. We support them with their funding. So it's sort of, like a lovely artist residence, but it's not that intense. They're all local and they live in Birmingham. They come and use us as much as they need to or want to. We also support a young community of creatives or practitioners in our BOM Plus programme, which is for 16 to 24-year-olds. And we support our audiences in accessing art, science and technology and different opportunities that we hope will have a positive impact on their lives. We also do quite a number of projects with the neurodivergent community. So we're very early days in sort of exploring that as an organisation that is run by neurotypical people. We are delving into that world and being open and honest about how we do that. We don't have all the answers. As Gavin referred to, we are located right next to the shiny New Street station. So one side you've got this beautiful John Lewis with lots of middle class people in there shopping. I am one of them, although I don't think I am middle class, but anyway. And then you've got this other weird bit meters away where we are opposite Adult World, which is great. And you know, we've got the issues that a lot of us, and I know people in different cities will be dealing with having to lock in participants from our young people's programme into the building because we've got someone who is, you know, who's taken a large amount of drugs, I think, in some phone boxes that are right outside our space that won't be removed because they make so much money off the advertising on them. So no one actually uses them for a phone box. They you know, McDonald's pay a massive amount of money, and we're dealing with cleaning up the vomit, the needles, the poo, and the people who have collapsed in there. You know, these everyday things that we're sort of suffering with, and from, you know, this sort of capitalist culture. But then we're also really aware about, you know, gentrification of spaces and coming in as an arts organisation and just sort of shooing people away, and how we actually deal with that on a day-to-day basis is definitely a challenge, and we don't have the answers. We're often categorised with the Digbeth lot, so weirdly in city-wide conversations we are classed as one of the organisations in Digbeth, even though we are technically not located here. But I think that's nice, and that says something about who we are. We're a smaller, sort of ambitious, I hope, and down-to-earth organisation like our colleagues down here. And I think this may or may not be interesting for this conversation, but there's just one last thing, is about our business model has changed quite rapidly over 4 years, which isn't very long at all. And I can talk a bit more about this if it's relevant or people are interested. But we had, sorry, I've just answered a phone call to someone whilst looking at my notes. Someone who I'm hoping will install our next exhibition, but I'll have to ring you back. So, yes, it's a business model. So when Karen first started, she found this space. So Karen Newman, who's our director and founder, she started the space and found this amazing space. It was empty. She managed, and if you know Karen, you'll understand how she managed to do this. She managed to persuade the landlord to give her £70,000 to get it to the point where it would be safe and open, and got some other investment. And actually, at the beginning, a lot of people, Arts Council included, I think there are some people in here, but they came along and they were sort of like, this isn't really, you know, we wouldn't fund this actually. And Karen was like, okay, that's fine, I'm going to do it anyway. And the City Council, we've never had City Council funding either, so we've had to think quite carefully about how we sort of keep going. And one of those things was sub-tenancies. So we did rent out some of our space to different organisations that we thought, you know, they were young, new organisations, and that we thought would be able to sort of complement our space. And the Arts Council and the City Council and loads of people loved this model. They were like, this is so great, you're diversifying your model, and you know, you're not relying on funding. But it was an absolute nightmare. And we've got rid of all of those people, and now we have the whole space ourselves. Woo! So, you know, people sort of like romanticise that model, and it might work for other people, but for us it was really, really difficult, and we've managed to sort of get out of that situation, and we're going to be opening our own cafe, just to give our little plug, in a few weeks, so please come and have a coffee. So yeah, so that might be something that could be pulled at a bit more further down the conversation, but we just don't know where it's going to go. And I'm going to pass on to Amahra.
So I am Amahra. I'm a proud Birmingham native. I was born and raised here. Anyone else? No one. Yay! Birmingham squad. I have never been the kind of artist, I've never been the kind of person who has waited for opportunity. This is doing some things. I've never been the kind of person to wait for opportunity to come to me. It's never been a privilege that was afforded to me, and I don't think that that's the kind of environment that I want to get comfortable in operating in. I remember when I was 18 years old, I was in a theatre company with my brother. And my mum said, I mean, it's great, it's lovely and everything, but you need to get like a proper job. So I got I got like 3 jobs. And then tax like kicked my ass. I said, 3 jobs, you can't do that. So my mum was like, you should go to university. And I said, I'll only go to uni if I can do what I love. Mum, can I go and do drama? She said, okay. So when I did drama and I graduated, and I was like, oh God, there's no jobs, this is fun. Like the rest of my classmates. And I took that as an opportunity. I was still making work. And I took that as an opportunity to actually use my experience as a catalyst to start a something. And I had no idea what that something was going to be. But I've been hustling since I was a kid, so we carry on in the same plight. And I set up an entity called MAIA, and at that time, I sort of gathered a group of creatives, some of my peers, in a room. I put out a tweet once upon a time, and like 50 people came. And I said, what are your barriers? What are your challenges? What is it that you're facing that's difficult, and what are you trying to achieve? Like, what's your dream? And when it came to barriers, lots of people were saying, I don't know anything about marketing, business plans, finance, what's funding, how do I go about that? And I took that as, how do we sort of have a conversation about business principles in the creative industries? Also acknowledging the fact that a lot of the people who came to those sorts of forums that we set up weren't recognised as sort of having ongoing relationships with the arts organisations and venues in the city. So we basically set up, like, I don't want to call it a business club, but it was a business club, capitalism, and we set up a business club for creatives, and we were running that. We've never had core funding, we've never had sort of ongoing funding from anyone. So we were sort of like working really ad hoc on little bits of money that we could get here and there. And I said, business skills are important, but there's a deeper issue here, and what is that? If we can't support other creatives to have continued work, we can have the odd job here and the odd job there, but applying business skills, so that isn't enough. So how can we sort of support an ongoing sort of pipeline of work? Organisations at that point, we'd started putting on multiple different events and performance platforms and things like scratch nights and stuff, and organisations then came to us and said, we want to work with the network that you're developing, can we do some stuff together? So they then commissioned us to do some stuff, so we would do stuff for arts organisations and cultural organisations across the country. And we just use it as an opportunity to say, okay, great, pay the artists and pay them a bit more, thank you. But that system was too easy to exploit, for one, and it didn't get to the root of what the issue is. So I kind of took a step back. I was also at the time based in Faisley Studios and got priced out about 3-4 years ago. So that sort of catalysed it. I needed to think about the organisation, I needed to think about the city in a whole different way, which also coincided with me falling pregnant. I promise this is relevant. So I took some time out. I was on maternity, well, I didn't really, I was working on another play. What's time out? Anyone? So I was working on the play and sort of put MAIA to the side for a little bit, because I thought I really needed to do some deep thinking about this. And while I was working on that play, I was touring it in London, and I was staying on my friend's couch, and I was like, well, this is nice. Friends, I'm so grateful. However, my back, anyone's been pregnant, they know, like, it's just not great. And I started to think about accommodation, and then Brexit happened, and I was watching Jane the Virgin a lot. And I was just like, do you know what? I just want to set up a hotel where artists and creatives can use it. It's designed for their benefit, but also how does everyone else benefit in an arrangement like that? How do other organisations who are always bringing in artists and creatives and find it really difficult to put them up and to accommodate them at an affordable rate on flexible terms? How do we design a business model that can support them, as well as providing infrastructure for artists and for the community? And that sort of set about a new way of thinking. As MAIA was always set up to how do we support artists to be sustainable, but I think that there needed to be a wider conversation about the city of Birmingham, what are the specificities here, and how do we design something that suits that. So I would say that MAIA has always adapted to suit a need, and I think it's kind of, we'll touch on this I'm sure in the capitalism question, but in this system it's like business 101, base it on need, and whose needs are we actually accommodating in the city. I'll leave that there. Great.
Thank you.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I've actually brought some slides. We should just keep me on track, if that's possible. So I'm going to talk just a briefly introduction to New Art West Midlands, the contemporary visual arts network for the region. And I suppose just thinking about when Antonio got in touch, just thinking about the broader context of where Birmingham's situated in terms of the region, but also nationally and internationally. So hopefully these slides will just kind of relate to some points that might come up and feed into some questions moving forward. So as the Contemporary Visual Arts Network for the region, we're supported by 6 higher education institutions. So their logos are there so you can see who they are. And I think that's possibly something to note, is the role of higher education in our cities, institutions in our cities across the region and more widely. And particularly in terms of, we think about ownership of property development. So if we take Coventry, for instance, the university owns 70% of real estate within the Ring Road, which I was quite shocked about. So their role in terms of shaping spaces is quite significant. Equally with University of Worcester, that stretch along the centre of Worcester, the River Severn is largely owned, as I understand, by University of Worcester. So how do we kind of work with higher education institutions moving forward? And we've got, if you don't mind me saying, Jenny Syson from, can you not hear me?
God, sounds really loud in my ear.
How's that? Is that better? Shall I hold it? Okay, so apologies. So higher education. But also, I was just noting Jenny Syson's here from the Midland HE and Culture Forum, which is an Arts Council kind of initiated thing to look at the relationship of higher education and culture in our regions. So I think that's quite an interesting thing moving forward, but there's questions there about how we engage. Does that relate purely to funding? Possibly not. I think it's external research funds. There's opportunities there, but I think largely people expect universities to have more money than they actually do. So it's actually about the other value, the intellectual kind of value in terms of collaborations there, but also just knowing the roles that they play. Just referring to my notes, I think also clearly as higher education is expanding, students and staff are audiences, and that's a point often forgotten. How do we engage with these new audiences coming through? And for New Art West Midlands, this relationship with higher education has shifted from what's been quite an instrumental relationship, looking at the recruitment and retention of students in our region, to something that's more interested in the cultural developments around placemaking, collaboration, cultural education, the themes that Jenny is working with. I urge you to have a look at the website. It's up and running now, the Midland HE. Next week, have a look at that. So I just wanted to talk about the power of collaboration. New Art West Midlands is a network, and we're one of 9 across the regions of England. These 2 points around the distinctiveness of the regional context are really important. So what's the distinctiveness of Birmingham, the West Midlands, the Midlands generally, and recognising the expertise of regional groups collectively to build knowledge. And I kind of the point that was drawn out this morning, I thought, and Antonio mentions in the introduction to today's event, is the 90 million investment in the national portfolio in Birmingham, this kind of critical mass of organisations. And I'm kind of interested in the leadership that Birmingham plays at a regional level and how we might look at that across the rest of the region moving forward. So that's something to bear in mind. Our programmes, we've been running as a network since 2010, and we run programmes that essentially look to deliver our goals around supporting and sustaining the visual arts. We have an annual exhibition, and we have an artist and creative development programme, and we look to profile successes of the region. Do look at the website. using the West Midlands Rail map here just to give a sense of the breadth of the region. And this is a good development on the previous map, which didn't include Stoke. Actually, it stopped at Stafford, so it's covering. This is the territory that we cover. But I'm quite interested moving forward about how, in terms of how we think about Midlands. And there's just reading a book by Robert Shaw at the moment called Bang in the Middle, around the idea of the Midlands and how it might be defined in terms of the north and the south. And he places Ipswich and Worcester as this kind of dividing line at the bottom, and Hull and Blackpool at the top. And anything that happens below that and above that is where the value is. Historically, he's arguing for the Midlands. But I'm quite interested in this way of kind of thinking about territories and what falls within this line. So we're currently, we have a programme called Midlander, research hub, which is around looking at Midlands territories elsewhere, so looking at international collaborations. But how do we disrupt the north-south dichotomy? How do we build the relationship, build identity within the Midlands? I think it's really important. And that's come out of listening for the past year and consultation around a visual arts strategy that we're yet to publish, but we'll be publishing soon. So after 6 events around the region, these are our visual arts strategy and priorities. I won't run through all of them, but I think diversity comes up, of course, as a distinctive thing for the West Midlands and for Birmingham in particular. But I think diversity in the broadest sense, so not just about protected characteristics and people, but about practice around geography. So how do we consider diversity and diversification in the wider sense, and how does that relate to supporting and sustaining practice? So in those terms, we think about the opportunities within the creative industries, and as an artist, how do you take advantage of opportunities without compromising integrity of practice, around the criticality of practice, and the opportunities that are emerging. Just as an aside, there was a Creative Industries Council event in September held at Birmingham City University and hosted by the Mayor, Andy Street. The Creative Industries Council were launching their Cities toolkit, and they had a panel discussion, and the art forms were all represented by regional representatives. The BBC Midlands office was represented, the gaming industry with Codemaster, Performances Birmingham, and Debbie Izzet, the director of Nativity, the popular film, Christmas film, if you've seen it. The visual arts was represented by the Crafts Council, and I think that was interesting. There was no regional representation at that level, and I think that's something we need to kind of attend to within the visual arts. How can we be vocal, and how can we support Creative Industries Council Federation to understand the value of visual arts? We're building partnerships moving forward, so this is cut off a little bit, the image, apologies there. Regional partnerships, for example, Coventry Biennial, with cultural organisations, the National Trust, for example, and internationally with organisations like International Curators Forum, who will be our lead partner on our New Art West Midlands 2019 exhibition, which is a shift to a commissions-based opportunity, which we'll be announcing shortly, but it's dependent on Arts Council funding, which we're just waiting to hear back on. So moving forward, just briefly, our programme, we have 4 strands looking at our work over the next 18 months. Diversity and diversification is a key part of that. It feels very formal compared to everyone else. So we have our Engine programme, which is our Artists and Creative Professional Development programme. I just wanted to note things like the Midlands Engine strategy for growth, which is the kind of counterpoint to Northern Powerhouse. So I think that's important to note. How do we kind of work within these governmentally kind of shaped things, and can they be advantageous for artists, or do they present a challenge? Midlands 2019, the City of Culture is prominent there. We're working with the city's 2 universities, the City Council, Culture Coventry, to look at strategically the visual arts leadership, and Ryan mentioned earlier the kind of raising the profile of visual arts in the city. So what can we do before 2021, but crucially after as well, within the time frame of the City Council's 10-year strategy. In terms of Midland, a research hub, kind of thinking about Birmingham 2022, what's the link between Coventry and Birmingham? What's at a regional level? What things are at play in terms of taking audiences on a journey? And finally, kind of more editorial focused work, Channel 4 potentially moving to the region. We're on the shortlist with a number of other cities, so what are the opportunities here? And I just note this one because I think the Channel 4's arts programming, there's 3 artists in residency documentaries that they led. I don't think they've been screened yet, but one of those included Rachel McLean in residence in the Ballroom. And I'm just interested in those relationships to the kind of private space and how to negotiate opportunities within these spaces. I'll possibly leave it there, but interesting to note that Channel 4's programming all seems Midlands based at the moment.
Cool. I'm going to make some more noise. Should we use this one? Or do you think we should use this one?
Okay. Thank you all. I just want to, I want to hit you all with the question. How do we survive in a capitalist economy? But first I just want to recap some little notes on some of the things I pulled out there. So how do we survive in a capitalist economy? Hacker culture. Is that an answer? Sharing space with other organisations. A business club. How do we survive in a capitalist economy? A business club. How do we survive in a capitalist economy? Deep thinking. Is that a solution? Be supported by universities. These are all things that are ways of surviving, but are they the ways that we should be adopting? Disrupt a north-south dichotomy. That's a way to survive in a capitalist economy. Be informal, be ad hoc. There were other little notes. What about raising the profile of visual arts activity? Is that a way to survive in a capitalist economy? Or to take audiences on a journey? These were so. Is hacker culture a way to survive in a capitalist economy?
Why?
I haven't got one on.
Yeah, we haven't got it.
It wasn't me. Yes, it could be. I think obviously there's not one way to say yes, this is how we can all survive. We should have a revolution of hacker culture. I think there's a lot of. I think hacker culture in itself can be quite elitist and sort of, you know, you see things. I always see things about algo raves. I'm looking at you, Antonio. And I'm like, who knows what an algo rave is exactly? I've worked at Fact and Bomb, like they're the places that you should know what that is if you work there, and I still don't know what they are. And like, I think there's there can be quite a bit of sort of snobbery and also mystique around hacker culture because there's a lot of people hacking things but obviously we only condone hacking for good. I think that actually one of the things that what you said that I wanted to pick up on was around the universities and the investment that you can gain from that. We've recently gone through a renegotiation of our relationship with the University of Birmingham, and I think that there is a real lack of, maybe not for organisations like Eastside, but this sort of ad hoc funding and this ad hoc project by project involvement. And I think so. Karen and myself are the only 2 full-time staff at BOM, and we have only recently a number of part-time staff, and that's very similar in like most organisations. And if we're dragging projects up and collaborations from scratch every time that we have to do something. The capacity that takes and the time and the money is huge. And I think that there's a lack of, I find, you may disagree because, you know, New Art West Midlands get a lot of support as well, but there's a lack of understanding of how much sustained support that I think that organisations need. And I think that, because I know we've recently become an MPO, that's been really helpful to have that 4 years sustainability. But I think I think there lies a responsibility with these sort of higher education and all institutions to support their local organisations, is basically my point.
I'm going to be that one to be like, I have no desire to assimilate or to fit into a capitalist structure like that can only ever be designed for a select few to win in any way. I have no desire to be a conduit to that, and particularly something like the hotel. The hotel is a concept that lots of people understand in lots of different ways, and therefore makes it very easy to communicate. If you don't get the arts thing, you get what a hotel is as a basic business model. I could have had a hotel up and running last year. If I was okay to be part of a displacement of a community that I said I was going to set out to serve, I could have done that. That's not the most important thing for me to have a hotel exist, because I said I wanted it to exist. You know, I said that I wanted to set up a venture to serve the community. So for me to establish something that would do them more harm than good in the long run, that's not something I have a desire to be a part of. And I acknowledge that I'm probably a person representative of an organisation that may not necessarily thrive in a capitalist structure, because if I decide that is going to be to the detriment of people, then I'll pivot. You know, how in saying that, like I said, I'm basing things on need, and I've always based things on the need of the community that I'm talking about, the community that I work with, and within that doesn't mean to say that there's not opportunities, but I'm really interested in how do we ensure that those opportunities are equitable and that they're spread across so that multiple people can benefit. I could talk for ages about this, but I don't want to take up all the time and space. But I don't have any desire to be okay with the fact of capitalism exists. So what do we have to do? We should burn down the system. That's what we should do. However, how far do we want to take it? We should fight the system.
I think that. Oh my God, I completely forgot what I was going to say. Fundamentally, I think that there is. It's a wider. Oh no, I've completely forgotten. That's embarrassing, isn't it? So what were you saying about
Before burn the system?
Yeah, not engaging. Oh,
Reaching
yeah.
as many people as possible.
So that's what I remembered it. So sorry. It's all about that thing of serving. Like in my notes when I was responding to what Gavin had written, I was thinking about the wider picture. So outside of like culture and arts and stuff, which obviously is across our lives, but that whole thing about how society values culture and art, and that's I think where there's an issue, because it's not being understood as being valuable, and we're pushing more and more towards this sort of vacuous society, sorry to be like a Donna Downer, of materialism, and this sort of whole thing around short-term loans, and I know that's a different issue, but this money grabbing thing, and I think that if the more that we move on towards that and away from serving our communities, then that is a major issue. I was quite interested in that comment that you said, it was Anthony Dowd, who said about the neoliberal view that these spaces, I thought that was really, really interesting, but then I thought, actually, they are physical spaces, but they are also catalysts and springboards for things to happen outside of the spaces as well, that I would hope would be fully engaging. But I sort of really liked and really hated that comment all at the same time. But anyway, yeah, let's fight the system.
It's the problematic of, like, if you take the idea of a year later at Grenfell Tower, that you have footballers on a pitch standing and in effect representing a societal relationship with a tragedy, and you have the BBC making a programme about it, you have cultural organisations dealing with it, but the government isn't doing anything about it. That's exactly that idea of shifting something in so that everyone's talking about it and we're all talking about burning down the system in a situation where the system will never even be singed because everyone feels like it's being dealt with, but actually it's not being dealt with at all. And so that's the sort of example that is very difficult to engage with and to work out how to unravel, how to fight against. But it's also difficult to escape from some of those truths. So because you could, one of those things that you mentioned about trying to reach as many people as possible, but capitalism is probably the system that has reached the most people and made most change, terrible things and amazing things to people's lives. That's what capitalism would argue is the best tool to reach and support the most people. Even though we know that's not true, it will continue to argue that is the position. So you do have to acknowledge if I'm setting up a gallery and it's a not-for-profit company, it's still a company, it still exists within that framework. How you have to a certain extent, we are abiding with it. If you want to run a hotel, you still have to keep that afloat. You have to be able to pay to clean the sheets and bring people in and keep that running. You have to engage with it. So what is it that we can do and abide with, that we can, that's what I think is interesting, some of the points you were making, much more guidance to support people who might have to deal with almost impossible situations.
Well, I think there's something about subverting, being at the table to be able to subvert the system or kind of use it to if it is about funding, to access funding and then to use it as an opportunity. So we could take the City of Culture as an example of basically a very large marketing campaign to put a spotlight on a place. Which brings investment, but arguably is one of the risks is for cultural content to be shipped in, for it not to engage with the grassroots, for it not to engage with artists that live and work in the city. So there are conversations happening at the moment that I've been overhearing around do we avoid it, do we work around it, do we not engage with it? But I think there's something about being at the table and actually recognising that in that situation there's so many decisions that have not been made at the moment, so there's an opportunity to grab and create pathways in the same way that I feel Janet and Brian are doing with their programmes in Coventry. If you take advantage of the opportunities that lie there, that's got to be a good thing. But I wonder what the opportunities are with 2022, for example. The Commonwealth Games, what's the cultural kind of wraparound there? How does that link with Culture Central, with Chamber of Commerce, with the kind of broader conversations that are going on at a strategic level, and how do you penetrate that if you're an artist? Do you need intermediaries? Is the West Midlands, for example, or Culture Central, are they the conduits for those conversations for artists to engage at a higher
The thing about that, things like opportunities like the Commonwealth Games, for example, always flag up to me things like how we really quickly ignore the what's already happening in those places. The artists already exist in there, and it only comes. Intermediaries of a certain scale, of a certain reputation, only sort of come into the equation when something big is there. And where is the desire for intermediaries without a Commonwealth Games, without a HS2, and how do we have those? I can't think of the rest of the word than interventions. How do we have those relationships before something sexy appears, basically? Why do we have to wait for that to happen? And then how do we actually make those relationships meaningful and equally of value
and not continue to exploit people who are tired of being exploited. You know, there is something that's come up a couple of times about value, and I think the arts and creative industries are something that sort of the challenges within it, the biggest challenges within it, aren't exclusive to our field, you know, and this idea of, I think that we need to be much more broader in our understanding of, or broader in how we talk about the challenges within our sector, and also be much more transnational than we claim to be, that sort of hyper-local solutions can't fix the challenges of Birmingham in the same way that national solutions can't, in the same way that international. It really takes a culmination of all of those things. So where are the intermediaries in that capacity as well? I am on the board of the Creative Industries Federation, who I know you mentioned briefly as well, and sort of I'm someone who likes to be informed in things that I think have no resonance to me. However, things like the universal basic income argument, for example, I've become really fascinated within that. My work has taken me to look at that. My work's taken me to look at things like housing, and I think it's really important that we have a sort of really broad deep critical understanding of how all of these things sort of come into play and how they affect everyone, you know. But I think that the arts is a beautiful tool that we could use to actually translate some of this stuff, that it shouldn't always have to be like the afterthought, but how do we embed it into our societal processes, our societal systems of thinking. I'm going to stop now.
I'd like to put it out to any of you who want to bring in a comment or answer some of those. We've been asking questions as much as giving any sort of solution.
I think that the university's impact agenda is something that artists should exploit much more than they do, because universities nowadays, they get money for having a decent impact as a result of their research, and there are answers in university research on an interdisciplinary level that if artists had access to that work, better access, they could integrate it into their work, and they could start to talk to capitalism. So for instance, one example would be artists who have access to care ethics could use care ethics in their work to speak to capitalist exploitation. But the issue there is universities opening their doors to the sort of electronic infrastructure for free. So in a way, maybe the ask is that artists were to ask universities to make free access something that they could give to the community for these expensive infrastructures, so that there can be a dialogue between work that is being done that's really useful for social development but is locked up, and artists could be the expressive tools.
I think that's a really interesting point, and universities and IP and the kind of interest wrapped up in that kind of seems to sit very much within the managed bureaucracy of the institution sometimes. So it's a very slow affair trying to move ground, and I think it's about having the perseverance there to do that. But individuals within HE, certainly with individuals I'm talking to, are very interested in opening and widening access, but still come up against that barrier of the institution and the policy that sits there. So it kind of comes around to the policy.
And I agree, and I also think that there's opportunities for universities to welcome contributions from artists as well. When I went to Worcester University, when I graduated, I was speaking to a former lecturer, and I was kind of like, you know, these were the challenges I experienced. Hey, let me be really cheeky and ask you if I can design a module and I can come back and teach it. And then they let me. They let me come back and teach that module, and then that continued for a while. But I think that for me was really like, it was like a research project for me as well, to see what the students after my year group, if there would be resonance in what I thought was necessary for professional practice, would that transcend beyond the sort of specific time that I was there, if that makes sense. That there was this opening then for me to be able to contribute and also learn. And I think that universities, especially as we have so many in this city, you know, that there amazing possibilities could happen within there, and I absolutely agree.
One thing before I put out another one is just that I'm trying to weigh up the implications and effects of say most artists engaging with that infrastructure within the universities. I do myself, and how that affects how you operate, affects your language, affects you. Are you engaging with the tip and one of the tools of capitalism in taking up your time, in academicizing your abilities to change the world? These are the things that I think, working in a university, we have to fight against. We have to not let that, so that everything becomes so over-theorized that we think the only way to change the world is through theory. And I think that's something that I've always thought about, being involved with universities since being a student and on. I've continued to have that connection. And how do you still manage to keep the hand involved, not only the administrative mind? So I think there is this danger, and universities know this and have to deal with that all the time. How can you be a creative university, art and design university, if your main intention is to increase the value of your private property? So these are the things, these are the contradictions that we find ourselves in, whether it's on a scale of an individual artist or a small organisation or an enormous city.
On that point, there's just a very small thing, which is universities are not very. Should I?
Yes, please.
Universities are not very good at circulating feelings and sentiments, experiences that are to do with love, are to do with creativity in the truest sense, freedom of thought. I know that's ironic. So they have a lot to gain from artists being involved in their spaces. And I don't think it's about universities being destructive of artists' worlds. I think it's more the case that artists have a lot that they can do for universities that they're currently lacking. So there's a business exchange to be exploited.
Hello. I don't know if this is a question as such, or maybe it's a comment, but it's about just this idea that talking about, the capitalist system, I see it more as a spectrum, and there's so many systems within systems, and you nurture we're not, I don't know, maybe it's hard, or maybe it's a comment that can be thought about and talked about.
It's
Yeah.
difficult to explain, but you know what I mean.
I just wanted to sort of come in my new role as coordinator for the Midlands HE and Culture Forum. Kind of in response to your question, sorry, I didn't catch who you were sort of in the corner then. I absolutely think that there's a really valuable conversation to be had between HE and the cultural sector in terms of a conversation, because you're right, universities are often invited to much more powerful tables than artists or people working particularly within the visual arts are, and they're kind of more, they're tables and panels of power often, and universities' agendas are quite interesting. But on the flip side of that, there's lots of ways in which artists can inform universities in a really useful way. Those of you who work within HE will have heard of REF's research excellence frameworks in order to justify funding for universities. Universities now have to demonstrate their value as researchers, and particularly within fine art departments, you have to be able to say, my research has tangible outcomes outside of this institution. My research is valuable in the real world. So they need real-world people to be able to inform that conversation. So that's one of the things that I'd really like to work on, particularly within the agenda within the East and West Midlands, because there's so many fantastic projects that are doing this already. They're just speaking a different language to the universities. So when an artist talks about research, they don't mean the same as someone within MAIA. But it could be a really fantastic and valuable conversation to get those people in the same room. So just another perspective.
Just to respond to that, I just want to acknowledge the woman who sat in front of you, that I really liked your phrasing of capitalist spectrum. I think that that's a way of sort of, because it feels like, oh, capitalist system, but then we all live in it and we all sort of contribute to it, but we don't like it, so that helps me, that spectrum word. But and also in response to the ref conversation, I think that it is great that the universities are doing it because they need to do it as part of their public engagement, but there's still very much the transaction is very sort of, it happens at the end, it's like, here's my research, visualise it for me, please. Yeah, and I think that there's to prove to universities that we can help them within when the research is actually happening and that it has actual impact is really difficult, because they've only got the money to do the sort of visualisation at the end. So it's sort of chicken.
That's less the case. Universities are employing specific departments just to look at that.
Yes, well, we've been working with the University of Birmingham, and we've got like a public liaison officer who is actually based in our organisation for a day a week, and she's fantastic, and that department is amazing. But then the actual academics, it's changing their sort of. Because they, again, we're coming back, they don't see the value, they don't see why they would or should, but it is, I suppose it is up to us to sort of, to show them why they should and would.
I think we should be engaging. I'm not saying you don't want to be working with universities. I think you want to be working out how to affect what they are and be part of it. So I'm thinking of the Steam House project. So we've got Ruth Claxton back in the bar there, and it's following an idea through so that the Vice Chancellor or Pro-Vice Chancellor of a university is going to the House of Parliament, and he's discussing and trying to get millions of pounds out of an MP, and he's telling the story of the artist and the engineer of Birmingham, because we realise that's a powerful story, and we want that to be put through and to change the ethos of the university. And so we do the little bit that we can to try and affect that, and that comes back so that you get a steam house, you have a production space, but it's an ongoing. The reason that exists is not just because we're really interested in the story, the opportunity to make stuff, And I think that should be enough in itself. So how do you make that still carry the weight to then turn into a £35 million project or a £100 million or a £1 billion project? That should be the thing that leads it, not that that's just a little bit that leaves us a shuffling around of money within our economy to allow people to increase the value of their private property. So if you take out increasing the value of the private property, there are loads of great things about this spectrum of capitalism that we can exploit fully to achieve loads of other things. So it's working out which are the key elements to not to try and encourage and be consciously, explicitly part of promoting. How do you stop promoting the thing that you don't believe in? And how do you do that? I think that's part of the responsibility of an art institution, of artists, of researchers. It's and you still have to admit it's a very small bit that you play, but you have to have those principles to keep that integrity.
Have any of you ever done a project that made you uncomfortable in that?
Have any of you done a project that made you feel uncomfortable in that sense? So in order to achieve something, you've sort of kind of sold your soul to the capitalist devil a little bit to get that money or something.
It's my life.
Yeah.
Everything I do. I'm a black woman, everything is political. That's my life. Yeah. I have to take things because it pays the bills.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm ranting now. I know there's another question, so I don't want to take up time, but yes, every day, every month.
Few things, but the main one is as an artist who works as a freelancer, self-employed, not officially connected with any institution, my main contact with places like BCU is chasing up invoices endlessly, with the bastards. And I therefore couldn't trust them as far as I can throw them, really. And same in Coventry's worse in some regards. Birmingham not too bad, but then I don't work for them that much. Okay, they're just as bad. There's something about the scale and I always feel there's an imbalance of power. I saw, I can't remember the number, but the turnover for BCU, it's either 7 million or 17 million or some number that I can't really imagine. I know that's not cash on hand. I know is it 70? That's in my mind, that's like a multinational corporation, or maybe not a corporate multinational, but it's definitely, it's a corporate behemoth, and I pay tax some years. There's something that worries me, maybe, about this sort of embrace of these large entities, and also the accountability of these large entities. I mean, at least the council, for all its flaws, at least we vote those idiots in. How do I make it BCU buy up all this? Coventry owns 70% of. Coventry Uni owns 70% of the property in the ring road. That's offensive. How is that democratically accountable and so on? How can we relate to that? I'm sorry, I don't know if that's even a question, but I just mainly wanted to put the artist grassroots thing in there.
Because I'm really interested in just that. When I said one of the answers was just ad hoc living, and something that you said about capitalism was a little bit of just almost not quite denying it, but actually just getting on with things and trying to find. So I think we're not saying that is the big answer. I think the answer is small things, small ways of working out how to survive. Because the university supporting you could change its mind completely in 5 years. New management system, and it's all gone. And even a research culture after the next ref that may change entirely. And so it's not something to be able to rely on to survive, apart from just in the short term. So I'd be interested to hear other people's opinions on quite ad hoc examples which have supported them for a period of time, especially if it's longer than 5 years. I think that would be an interesting thing to.
I'm hoping this links. I'm really interested in different models of doing stuff. So I am a theatre maker. I'm also a producer for other artists, and I work with other artists to help them do their stuff. And I became that by accident because apparently I acquired the skills I was going to be able to do that. And I became really interested in this idea of how many other people like me had fallen into these sort of job roles without actually deciding that that was what they were going to set out to do. Long story cut short, last year I set up a network for producers of colour. I put out a couple of tweets. I expressed my challenges as a black woman working as a producer in the city. I put out a couple of tweets and 60 people came into a room and we all vented together, and then we're like, how can we use this? The reason I set that up was I acknowledged that so many of us are working in saturation, in isolation. What can we actually do and build when we collate our resources and collate our ideas together? And now we're going and going to do amazing stuff because we're able to strategize in a different way. There's a model of working that some New York-based playwrights set up some years ago. It's called 13P. Has anyone heard of it? 13 playwrights basically set up a working group of sorts and said, every year we're going to work on one production and we're going to collate all of our skills, contacts, we're going to dedicate a whole year just to work on your project. Next year it'll be yours and we'll all rotate roles. And this is, collectivism is one of the antitheses to capitalism, 100%, and I use that they are micro in the grand scheme of things. However, monumental things can happen in a person's lived experience while we're here, and I'm really interested in those sort of micro solutions to effecting the change that we all say that we want to see. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure the gentleman's name in the white shirt, but it's, yeah, okay, it's really
Gavin.
interesting. I think if you could just expand a bit more, yeah, it was really interesting what you were saying about, you just hinted on it really. I mean, I thought I was going to come here today and people were going to talk about what's actually going to happen to the area of Digbeth. Are you all going to lose your rents, etc.? What I can't understand is, why there isn't a sort of concerted effort in areas like that. I mean, let's just accept gentrification. I don't like it, like a lot of you guys. There's issues with capitalism, but it seems to me that is there going to be like a concentration? There's obviously the money coming in. There's obviously like these Deutsche Bank of whatnot, Brexit, HSBC, perhaps Channel 4. Is there any kind of private galleries? Is there any development plan to have like a serious area, say in the Jewellery Quarter of galleries, or here? There's no plan like that. It seems to be from what you're saying that it's just going to be universities that are going to kind of support artists doing, artists working in a kind of ad hoc fashion. As you say as well, also about the funding, it's very sort of on and off. So it seems to me that I've looked briefly at these plans, so what's going to happen in this development on the back of the HS2. It seems to be they're going to have all these knowledge areas, technology areas, but not an arts area, dedicated visual arts area. My view, so I'm rambling slightly. So just what your thoughts on that are. Slightly worries me that, like galleries like, say, the White Cube or Rebecca Miro or whatever, where are they, It's the second biggest city. Where is this international art market in Birmingham? Because, it's obvious. Sorry.
Yeah, there isn't one. So there isn't any reason for a commercial gallery to open in Birmingham. There isn't a market. They don't even need to open galleries anymore. So they do that because actually a lot of the people involved in what seems like big monster machines, they really love art. Some of them totally love art, and they still want to put shows on with great artists. They're ultimate business people, and they're sharks, and they will do whatever it takes to make their artists be the biggest in the world. And so there's no reason for them to be in Birmingham. There's a reason to be in Hong Kong. There's a reason to be in New York or Los Angeles.
We've got equivalent area in London, absolutely packed. First Friday, thousands of tourists,
Well, I curated the first show on Viner Street in 2001, and it's got nothing to do with the shows that happen on that street. It's just to do with the growth and potential of financing that was available in relation to selling contemporary art, and then just more people moving in, and that was a cheap area. It's nothing like this. It has actually no comparison at all to what is happening in Digbeth. There is no comparison in relation to the art market and the art world. That's why I think it's important that we make spaces like this and like the other spaces we've been talking about, the other ventures in the city, because there won't be a commercial move. There won't be private galleries unless there's someone who loves Birmingham and wants to set up a private gallery and buys art and wants to show it. But you wouldn't sell them. You haven't. There isn't in Manchester. It's just. I mean, it's a good thing to try and get. The reason why we set up our ESP program here at Eastside Projects was because we wanted people to see more into the way the art world works. And I felt myself that as an artist, I didn't learn anything about the art world until I tried to curate my first exhibition and got through the front door into the back rooms and spoke to. I actually realised that artists have a lot of power in that situation. That artists lead you to all those collectors and writers and curators and everyone else if you want to engage with that world. But you might go into it and decide that isn't the way that you want to survive in a capitalist economy. And I think so. We do.
Sorry, I would say because on the back of a lot of artistic activity, you have obviously like all the jobs that the artists don't do, like people doing the audio or people installing the exhibitions. I think, in a sense, you've got that infrastructure in London which can employ artists. I mean, they need jobs, don't they, as well as showing work. And so you've got that's also an aspect, isn't it, that would be difficult to maybe reproduce in Birmingham.
So, but if you can't. I'll just take one thing. I think it's just that, I mean, in a way, that's what Steam House is partly an attempt to do, an attempt to answer that, to say, okay, what about if you make a national production centre, and so people can come here and make things on a bigger scale in that city? Then that's not going to solve everything. It doesn't solve it in the way that 50 commercial galleries and 20 public galleries provide work for artists. Of course not, but it's one step, and it is just a small one. But so I think I would discount entirely that commercial market in relation to it. It's not really worth pursuing. We've looked at it actually. We invested time and energy in thinking about that, seeing if that was worth developing further. But it's not currently. Maybe in 50 years' time.
Thank you. Cities have been designed in ways to either support or prohibit certain things from happening, right? So, and part of, I guess, it's been important for me to really understand like the soil of Birmingham and why certain things can grow here and certain things can't. And I had so many things to say about this. Oh no, sorry. And it comes back to like really understanding what people need here and how do we find the mechanisms to support that. The hotel primarily was about how do we have a business model that can create ongoing roles for people in and outside of their artistic capacities, based on the fact of loads of people have accommodation needs. The other thing I was going to say was about cities focus their sort of PR angles in particular ways. So, you know, we'll see amazing stories about our food and retail. Nobody's really seen things about it. Anyway, we'll see amazing things happen, you know, dialogues happening about the foodie culture in Birmingham, and that's something that the whole city can really back. You know, like some other cities have arts at the top of their public, you know, output, and I think that that's something that outside of the sector here, our city has yet to do, and I'm very interested in what it would take for that to happen, if ever. But I think that we just have to keep mobilising and being really strategic in how we organise to do that, and that takes us all actually talking to each other better and acknowledging that there are so many people outside of what we understand the sector to be who are actually helping to build it.
It's a question for you, Gavin. In 2001, you edited Curating the 21st Century, and now we're X amount, 19, 18, where are we now? Years on. That future is something that you're sitting there talking about, capitalist kind of construct in a way that we're not able to move forward, all these things that I've heard about financial kind of projects costing huge amounts of money, models that don't work, in my kind of experience, and it hugely kind of, I suppose, to get to the point, is that when we talk about the future, what is it going to look like, given the fact that, you know, 18 years ago we were talking about curating and seeing and experiencing work, and probably that was the most important thing at that point as curators. And now we're dealing with a whole plethora of other issues. I don't have a finger on the question, or, you know, it's something that I'm just like, hugely concerned about.
That's what happens when you get older.
Is it?
You
ramble.
Suddenly, not you ramble, but you can get, it's that sense of dealing with. So that was a project I worked on 20 years ago with exams, and we've been talking about revisiting that. Like, how has that changed? What are the differences, the agendas? What's been picked up on 20 years ago? That for curators to achieve, even the term curator was not obviously as banded around as it is. You know, you weren't in that curator that were on the 20 years ago like you did now. So it's a slightly different tone. But for me, I mean, in that conference, in that book, I proposed a quick response unit of artists and curators to deal with emergency world situations. So I still think that's exactly what we need. I still think it's, I think in some ways it does and is happening. I'm very optimistic about it. So much as it might have sounded like I think I've been trying to pull out some of the problematics that are there, but and like Jenny mentioned this thing earlier about, I was trying to think of something that I felt really compromised about a project I've done, and actually I don't, because and someone else was asking about public art projects that I worked on recently, and I think it's really important to work with and in situations that you disagree with. And so I don't feel compromised by it. I feel like I have to work on that situation. Like we're working with Barrett Bogus and Whitney Taylor Housing in Banbury. We're working with the City Council and HS2 on the biggest public artwork for the City of Birmingham, Station Clock by Susan Phillips. We're making what will be the biggest artwork for this city that should last for the next 50 years or so. So and I just think that from 10 years ago, say the Eastside project, we wanted to get involved in those sorts of things because we wanted to be able to change them just enough that we believe that is worth doing based on experience that we've already picked up. So we believe in ourselves and we try and push that into other situations. So I think it's all up for grabs. It isn't that the power or role of the curator has been diminished, the power of the role of the artist has been diminished. That's not. There's only one Prime Minister in the world who's an artist. So maybe we want more. So, Eddie Rami, amazing artist, Prime Minister of Albania, he's able to build that into his practice. How else can we do that? How else do we integrate that? I think that's the sort of ambition that we should be doing. And it is there. There is an example. There is someone doing that, taking that on. But not all artists want to be politicians. And so you have to allow space and make space and build it into the programming of your cities and your education systems and your employment and your all of the underlying principles has to be space for artists to do whatever they want. That is the most important thing. Not that they run the country or make the health system better, that they do whatever they want and they just come up with a new rubber bung to stick on the bottom of a chair. If you don't allow that, then everything else isn't worth it. So I still think that's why I said this thing that I don't think the power of art can be disputed. I don't think it is disputed. I think it is the most powerful and most dangerous thing that we do as humans, and that's why it is used in certain ways to undercut and control people and to control the way that we deal with politics. It is the most important thing. So I still believe that, and I really love being in a space where we get to do what we want to an extent.
Yeah, time for 2 more questions. I think there was one from Susan.
I don't need a microphone. I've got quite a big voice. So I just wanted to say I'm an artist who pokes her head up above the parapets about once every 10 years. And 10 years ago I came to an event very similar to this in, I think it was the old Vivid building. And Ruth Claxton was there, and I think you folks were there, and I'm sure Gavin was there, and people were, talking about, oh, it's so terrible, how are we going to get going, how are we going to make money, how can we function as artists in this political environment, blah, blah, blah. So 10 years later, I raise my head again, and I come to another one of these things. And you're kind of all having the same question, but just stop and look at yourselves. Birmingham is bloody amazing. In 10 years, what has been achieved here by the artists and by the organisations. Friction Arts bought their own place. Eastside is still going. Vivid is going from strength to strength. Bomb has turned up. Steamhouse has turned up. What's happening at Grand Union in Centralia and Strix. This is amazing. So I would like to just be a voice of positivity in this moment and just say, you are nailing it in terms of functioning within a capitalist society.
I just want to say that's a really well made, and I think that's where Birmingham as a leader in this respect. Yeah, we could be shouting about that and telling the story a bit more. I think Gavin mentioned stories earlier. I think it's how we do tell stories about our places in the wider Midlands. Actually, I keep banging on about the Midlands, but I think that's really important. We're very quiet actually, and we do need to shout more about the successes.
And just the final question, or
No.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say something that's been getting on me for ages. The lady that runs BOM, when you had...
I don't run it.
Oh, sorry,
but,
who works there. When you had all those people there who were, you know, the people who wanted to leave, basically, because they, I don't know, they were not a good fit with who you were, and blah, blah, blah. But they got you out of the hole. They paid rent for a while.
Yes.
That's all it's all about. You get yourself out of a hole and then you move on to the next thing later when you can.
Yeah, but I can still say it was bloody awful.
Yeah.
And it was an example of putting yourselves through something that you like get involved in something that is totally detrimental to nearly almost everything that we stand for in the organisation. It was affecting our working place. Literally, the physicality of the building was rotting because of the cooking that was happening, and it got to the point where it was literally breaking us down as an organisation from the inside out. And at one point, the director of that business said, as we were like slogging our guts out to do an MPO application, he's like, "Yeah, I think I might do that." He's like running a restaurant, and it was that absolute arrogance that he thought that he could do that, and then at one point wanted to hang an ice cream van in the middle of the gallery, and just thought that that was okay, and he could serve like alcoholic ice cream from it. It was just very difficult, and yeah, they did help us with the rent, but I think in hindsight we actually would not do that. I wouldn't have done that. No, I would gratefully take ad hoc funding and scavenge and scrape rather than, almost kill ourselves by working with them.
I'm for the ice cream van, but not if it's got alcohol in it, okay? It doesn't need it, it's good enough as it is. Thank you for the kind words earlier as well, and thank you all for, I've enjoyed it, I hope you have too, and it's left us obviously with a lot of stuff to sort out. All right, thank you very much.